The twin sisters lived right next door to me in our quiet suburb. Ever since we were toddlers, they fought over which one of them would get to marry me. Our parents always joked that no matter which girl I picked, our families would be tied together forever. But when we got old enough to actually settle down, they both said those years were just childish nonsense. The very next day, they started fighting over a different guy named Jasper. To make Jasper laugh, they pushed me into a freezing river over 6 feet deep, knowing full well I couldn't swim. As I thrashed around gasping for air, they pointed and giggled. Look at him flailing like a drowning dog. Isn't that the funniest thing you've ever seen? They only pulled me out when I was seconds from passing out, just to satisfy Jasper's cruel curiosity. That was the moment my heart turned to ash, and I moved far away from that city. But later, they started hunting for me like they'd lost their minds. The wind cut through my soaked clothes on the walk home, and I couldn't stop shivering. The cold in my body was nothing compared to the ice in my heart. Before I even reached my door, Vivian's name flashed on my phone. Her voice was sharp the second I picked up. Silas, where the hell are you? All you had to do was soak in the water for a bit to make Jasper smile. Why are you making such a big deal out of a little joke? Get back here. Before she finished, Quinn chimed in from the background. Jasper won't cut his birthday cake until you're here. He thinks you're actually mad at him, and it's ruining his mood. We worked so hard to make him happy. So quit being a brat and move it. I tried to answer, but my vision went black. When I opened my eyes, all I could smell was disinfectant. The nurse by my bed didn't hold back. You young people have no respect for your health. You're lucky a good Samaritan found you walking around in wet clothes. With a fever like that, you nearly died. I closed my eyes and said nothing. She asked me to call my family to come stay with me. I waited a long time before whispering, I don't have any family. The whole 2 days I was in the hospital, neither of the foster sisters called me once. Before they met Jasper, I'd call a dozen times. If I was even 30 minutes late for dinner, they panic and ask where I was. Offer to come pick me up now. I've been gone 48 hours and hadn't gotten a single text. The day I was discharged, I paid my own bill and took an Uber home. Before I knew it, I was standing in front of the Foster's front door. I shook my head at myself and turned to leave. But Jasper's voice drifted through the cracked door. Silas hasn't been back in 2 days. Didn't you girls give him a call? Vivian snorted. He's just throwing a tantrum. He'll come crawling back. Besides, his parents are dead. Where else is he gonna go? He'll show up looking like a kicked dog sooner or later. Quinn agreed. Jasper, you're too nice. Silas was being a buzzkill the other day. Let him suffer outside for a bit. It'll teach him we don't actually need him. But still, Jasper didn't finish, because Vivian clapped a hand over his mouth and told him to hush. Don't let that loser ruin our mood. Jasper glanced toward the door like it was an accident and locked eyes with me. A smug grin spread across his face. That's when I understood he knew I was standing there. He'd done it all on purpose. I clenched my fists, shaking with rage and heartbreak. That night, I went back to my own house. The first time I'd set foot in my parents' old place since I moved in with the Fosters. After the funeral in the middle of the night, Jasper called. The second I answered, I heard the sisters screaming at each other. They were fighting over which floor Jasper should sleep on. This used to happen every single day when I first moved in. Vivian lived on the 2nd floor, Quinn on the 3rd. They fight over who got me on their level. Back then, I kept the peace by switching floors every week. Hearing that same old fight now felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I hung up, opened a travel app, and booked a one-way ticket to my hometown for the day after tomorrow. The next morning, I walked into the Foster's house and saw Vivian making breakfast, while Quinn brewed coffee. They both looked up when the door opened, their eyes full of nothing but mockery. Quinn, always blunt, didn't hide it. Oh, look who showed up. I thought you were so tough trying to threaten us by running off. Why are you back, by the way? Jasper's in your old room now. Go move your stuff into the storage closet under the stairs. That closet was where the cleaning lady kept her supplies. I looked at Vivian, hoping she'd think Quinn had gone too far. Instead, she just looked worried about Jasper. I don't want Silas being here to make Jasper uncomfortable. Maybe it's better if he goes back to his own house for good. Quinn nodded hard. He's not even part of this family. He's just been leeching off us. Jasper's different. He's sensitive. I don't want him feeling awkward with Silas lurking around. Hard to believe these were the same girls who clung to my sleeves. At my mother's funeral, back then they begged me to move in, promising to take care of me forever. Now, I was just a leech who didn't know when to leave. I couldn't understand how people's hearts could change so fast. Before I could say anything, Quinn grabbed my arm and shoved me toward the door. Get out before Jasper wakes up. I don't want him seeing your face and getting depressed. Vivian's voice followed me as the door slammed. Change the keypad code, too. We don't want him sneaking back in. I didn't even get to tell them I'd only come for my passport and ID. I took a deep breath, went to the government office, and reported my documents lost so I could get temporary replacements. Then I called a real estate agent. I decided to sell the house. My parents left me. It hurt to let go, but I was never coming back to this city. After that, I stopped by the grocery store to buy ingredients for a decent meal. I'd always been sickly, and the Foster sisters used to take turns cooking for me. They said outside food was poison and couldn't stand to see me get sick. I remembered posting once about craving a spicy peanut satay burger. The next day, Vivian showed up with a homemade version. I noticed little cuts and burns on her hands and asked what happened. She hid them behind her back like it was nothing. I just got a little messy trying to get the recipe right for you. I felt so guilty and so grateful. I was just craving it. Vivian, you didn't have to go through all that. I could have just ordered takeout. She frowned and said she'd never let me eat low-quality food as long as she was around. Quinn was the same, stayed up all night, once learning to bake my favorite cake from scratch. Their mom used to joke it was a shame polygamy was illegal. I could have married both her daughters now. All of that felt like a dream from another life. But it didn't matter. I was leaving tomorrow. When I unlocked my front door, I froze. The sisters and Jasper were sitting comfortably in my living room. I cursed myself for not changing the code the second I got home. Silas, you're back. I really wanted to see your childhood home, so the girls brought me over. You don't mind, right? Jasper stood up with a fake sparkling smile before I could answer. Quinn snapped at him for only mentioning Vivian. Jasper, if you don't give me a hug right now, I'm going to be very offended. Jasper laughed and played along, making a big show of it. I ignored the circus and walked straight into the kitchen to cook. Quinn used to be so jealous of my attention. If I spent 5 extra minutes talking to Vivian, he'd pout for hours. I used to tease her for being a brat, and she'd just grin and say she was only like that because it was me. I thought I was special to them. Turns out I was just a placeholder, until someone better came along. While I was chopping vegetables, Jasper wandered and looking nervous. Silas, why are you so quiet? Are you mad? I came without an invitation. I didn't mean anything by it. I just wanted to see where you grew up. I didn't look up. You've seen it now. Leave? Quinn stormed in, her face dark. Silas, what is your problem? Jasper's just being friendly. He wants to be your friend. You jerk. Honestly, I should have kicked you out years ago. If I'd known you'd be this ungrateful. Vivian walked in behind her looking just as disgusted. You're being pathetic, Silas. Apologize to Jasper right now. I slammed the knife down and laughed coldly. You break into my house and demand I apologize? Are you insane? Jasper's eyes welled up, right on cue. Silas, I know you hate me, but please don't yell at the girls. Breaks my heart to see them sad. The sisters rushed to his side, cooing over him like a wounded puppy. Vivian glared at me with pure hatred. What is wrong with you? No wonder people used to bully the hell out of you. In school, the words hit me like a punch and my head spun. In middle school, I was small and quiet. An easy target. Kids called me horrible names and treated me like trash. Once they locked me in a music room overnight. I sat in the dark corner, shaking with terror, until the sun came up. It was Vivian who braved a thunderstorm to find me. She searched every room in the school until she heard me crying. The next day, Quinn tracked down the security footage and dragged the principal into it. She made sure every kid who touched me got suspended. It's true what they say. The people who know you best know exactly where to twist the knife. Vivian saw my face go pale and seemed to realize she'd gone too far. But before she could say anything, Jasper cut in. Silas is clearly upset. Maybe I should just go. Queen immediately turned back to him. Don't be sad, baby. I'll go home and make you that honey glazed pear dessert you like. That was my favorite dessert. Quinn had spent weeks in a cooking class just to master it. For me now, it was only a tool to comfort her new favorite toy. I watched them leave, my decision to move away hardening into steel. But that evening, the three of them pushed my door open again. Vivian was holding a takeout container with a smug look on her face. I stared at them, confused about what game they were playing now. Vivian set a bowl of spicy peanut satay noodles in front of me. I made this myself. Taste it and tell me if it's as good as the old days. For a second, my heart softened. Then I remembered the freezing river and their laughter on the bank. No thanks. I'm not hungry. Vivian froze, her pride turning to irritation. I went out of my way to bring you this. And you're going to be a dick about it. We stared each other down for a minute until I finally gave in, just wanted them gone. I figured since I was leaving tomorrow, one meal wouldn't kill me. But after 2 bites, something tasted off. I looked up. Why does this taste different? She smiled. I added a special blend of ground beef, and extra peanut butter to the sauce. My chopsticks clattered to the floor. I stared at her in horror. Vivian, you know I have a severe allergy to beef and peanuts. She rolled her eyes and waved me off. Oh, please. Jasper wanted to know if someone could really be allergic to both. At once, I told him, you were probably just being dramatic all these years. Look at you. You're fine. Stop playing the victim. For once. Quinn nodded, checking her watch. See 2 allergens, and he's not dead. Jasper, I win the bet. You have to drive me to work tomorrow. Without another word, they turned and walked out, laughing with Jasper. The second the door clicked shut, my throat started to tighten. I gasped for air and scrambled for my EpiPen. only to realize all my medication was still at the foster house. I managed to dial 911 before my vision failed and I collapsed. When I woke up, the smell of bleach was back. The doctor told me I was lucky to be alive and needed to stay for observation. I didn't sleep a wink that night. The next morning, I checked myself out and went straight to the airport with my bags packed. I didn't forget to change my home's entry code. On the way out, I told my real estate agent I'd give him a 5% bonus if he handled everything without calling me. As the plane got ready for takeoff, my phone lit up with dozens of calls from his sisters. I turned it off and didn't look back. The hum of the airplane engines was a heavy, vibrating drone that filled the cabin, drowning out the murmurs of the passengers around me. I leaned my forehead against the cool, double-paned window, watching the city below shrink into a harmless grid of tiny, flickering lights before being swallowed entirely by a thick blanket of gray clouds. My throat still felt tight, a lingering phantom of the anaphylactic shock that had nearly ended my life less than 24 hours ago. Every breath I took felt deliberate, a quiet victory against the poison they had fed me just to settle a petty wager. I reached into my pocket and touched the cold metal of my phone. It was dead, turned off the moment the flight attendant announced the cabin door was closed. Before the screen went black, the notifications had been a relentless cascade of missed calls and urgent texts from Vivian and Quinn. Silas, answer the phone. Where are you? The real estate agent is at your house. What is going on? Stop playing games, Silas. This isn't funny anymore. They still thought it was a game. To them, my life, my health, and my dignity were nothing more than a stage play where I was meant to play the tragic silent extra while they and Jasper took center stage. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me. For the first time in years, I didn't dream of the freezing river or the dark music room or the sound of their laughter. I slept a deep, dreamless sleep, wrapped in the cold comfort of knowing that whatever happened next, I was finally alone. We touched down in my hometown, a quiet coastal city called Blackwood, just as the first gray light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. The air here was different, sharp, salty, and thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. It was the place my parents had loved before they moved us to the suburbs for a better future. I checked into a small, unassuming motel near the harbor. The room smelled of lavender bleach and old wood, a sterile but comforting scent that reminded me of nothing. I sat on the edge of the springy mattress, turned on my phone just long enough to swap out my SIM card for a new, unregistered prepaid one, and threw the old card into the trash can by the desk. With that single snap of plastic, the last thread connecting Silas to the foster sisters was severed. The next few weeks passed in a quiet, almost therapeutic blur. I found a small, one-bedroom cottage for rent on the edge of the cliffs, overlooking the gray, churning sea. It was old, with creaking floorboards and a stone fireplace that kept the damp chill at bay. I spent my mornings walking along the rocky shoreline, letting the freezing sea spray sting my face. It was cold, yes, but it was an honest cold. It didn't pretend to be warmth. My real estate agent, a quiet, professional man named Mr. Vance, handled the sale of my parents' suburban house with remarkable efficiency. True to my promise, I wired him his 5% bonus the moment the funds cleared. One evening, as I was sitting by the fire with a cup of black coffee, my new phone buzzed. It was an email from Mr. Vance. Dear Silas, I hope this email finds you well. The closing of your property has been finalized, and all documents have been officially recorded. However, I felt it necessary to inform you of a rather unusual occurrence. Over the past 2 weeks, 2 young women, identifying themselves as your sisters, have repeatedly visited the property. They have also called my office multiple times, demanding to know your current whereabouts and the forwarding address for the sale proceeds. One of them became quite hysterical, claiming you have been kidnapped or were having a mental breakdown. Per your strict instructions, I did not disclose any information and have blocked their numbers from our office line. I thought you should know, in case I need to take further measures. Best regards, Arthur Vance. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. A year ago, the thought of them looking for me, of them being hysterical on my account, would have sent a pang of guilt straight through my chest. I would have called them back, apologized for causing worry, and tried to smooth things over. Now, I felt nothing. It was like reading a news report about a minor traffic disturbance in a country I had never visited. I typed a short reply. Thank you, Mr. Vance. Please continue to ignore them. Our business is concluded. I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and watched the embers in the fireplace slowly die down to gray ash. 3 months passed. In Blackwood, I started a small antique restoration business. I had always been good with my hands, a trait I developed during the long, lonely summers of my youth when the twins were out with their popular friends and I was left to my own devices in my father's workshop. There was a quiet dignity in taking something broken, scarred, and abandoned, cleaning away the grime of neglect and restoring its strength. One Tuesday afternoon, the bell above my shop door chimed. I didn't look up immediately, carefully applying a layer of varnish to a 19th century mahogany writing desk. "I'll be right with you," I said, my voice steady. "Silas." The varnish brush froze in my hand. I slowly raised my head. Standing in the doorway of my shop was a woman in a tailored wool coat. Her hair was pulled back, and her face was pale, devoid of the smug, mocking expression I had last seen on her. It was Mrs. Foster, the twins' mother. She looked older than I remembered. The sharp, vibrant woman who had once joked about polygamy and laughed at my quietness now looked fragile, the lines around her eyes etched deep with exhaustion. "How did you find me?" I asked, my voice devoid of any warmth, but entirely free of anger. Mrs. Foster took a hesitant step into the shop, her eyes scanning the dusty shelves, the old clocks, the smell of sawdust and turpentine. I went to the university registry. I knew you had a degree in historical preservation. I called every restoration shop within a 300-mile radius of your old hometown. It took me months, Silas. I carefully set my brush down in a jar of mineral spirits and wiped my hands on a rag. "If you're here to ask me to come back, you've wasted your time, Mrs. Foster." "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. She walked closer, her hands trembling as she clutched her leather handbag. "I'm not here to demand anything. I needed to see if you were alive." I let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Alive? That's ironic, considering your daughters fed me my two most lethal allergens for a bet and left me to choke to death in an empty house." Mrs. Foster flinched as if I had struck her. She closed her eyes, tears leaking through her mascara. "They told me it was a mistake. They said they didn't know. They said you were just being dramatic." "They knew," I said flatly, leaning against the workbench. "Vivian watched me break out in hives when we were 10 because a neighbor served peanut butter cookies. She was the one who ran to get the school nurse. She knew. They both knew. They just didn't care because Jasper wanted to see if I was lying." "They're miserable, Silas," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "The house, our home, is a nightmare now." I stood there, watching her cry, and felt a strange, detached curiosity. "What happened?" "Jasper." She spat the name like it was poison. "He moved in. Fully moved in after you left. He didn't have a job, Silas. He didn't have any money. He was a fraud. He had dropped out of his university, and he owed hundreds of thousands of dollars in gambling debts to some very dangerous people." I didn't say anything. I just listened. "Vivian and Quinn, they fought over him every single day," Mrs. Foster continued, her voice shaking. "It wasn't like when you were there. When you lived with us, you always kept the peace. You cleaned, you cooked, you took their tempers and turned them into quiet conversations. You were the anchor, Silas. But Jasper fed on their rivalry. He would tell Vivian that Quinn was prettier, and then he would go to Quinn and tell her Vivian was planning to kick her out of the house." She wiped her face, her eyes red and hollow. 2 months ago, they got into a physical fight. A real, violent fight in the kitchen. Vivian threw a boiling pot of water. It missed Quinn, but it hit the dog. And then Jasper just laughed. He recorded it on his phone. He said they were wildcats and that he loved a show. I felt a cold sensation in my stomach, but it wasn't pity. It was just the grim satisfaction of a predictable tragedy. And then, "They realized he was using them," she whispered. But it was too late. He had already convinced Quinn to take out a second mortgage on her portion of the family estate to invest in his fake business. He took the money and vanished. Just blocked their numbers and disappeared. We found out later he had 3 other girls in different cities doing the exact same thing. And now they want their emotional punching bag back. I concluded for her. "They're broken, Silas," Mrs. Foster begged, reaching out to touch my arm, but I stepped back, out of her reach. Her hand hovered in the air, empty and trembling. "They realize what they did. They haven't slept in weeks. They cry your name in their sleep. They kept your old room exactly as it was. They even moved the cleaning supplies back out of the closet. They want to apologize. Please, just come home. Just for one dinner. Let them make it up to you." I looked at the mahogany desk I had been working on. It had been deeply gouged, scorched by a careless cigarette, and left in a damp basement to rot. I had spent 40 hours sanding it down, filling the deep wounds with matching wood compound, and carefully staining it so the scars were invisible to the naked eye. But humans aren't made of mahogany. You can't just sand away the moments your heart turned to ash. "No," I said. "Silas, please." "Mrs. Foster," I interrupted, my voice quiet but absolute. "When I was in that hospital, suffocating, with my throat closing up, I didn't have any family. I told the nurse that because it was the truth. The boys who bullied me in middle school locked me in a dark room, but your daughters did something far worse. They showed me that the people who promised to love me forever were the ones holding the key to my coffin." I walked over to the shop door and held it open. The cool coastal breeze swept into the warm shop, carrying the scent of the sea. "I hope Vivian and Quinn find peace," I said, "but they will have to find it without me. Please don't come back here." Mrs. Foster looked at me for a long, silent moment. She saw the lack of anger in my eyes, which is always far more terrifying than rage. Rage means you still care enough to be angry. Indifference means you're already dead to them. She slowly bowed her head, let out a ragged sigh, and walked out into the gray afternoon. For a few weeks, I thought that would be the end of it. I threw myself back into my work, taking on more complex restoration projects, and even hiring a local high school student, a quiet kid named Leo, to help me with the deliveries. But guilt is a relentless predator. It doesn't stop trailing you just because you've crossed state lines. It was a Tuesday evening, almost 6 months after I'd fled the city. The fog had rolled in thick from the bay, wrapping the coastal town in a damp, silent shroud. I had closed the shop early and was walking up the gravel path to my cottage, carrying a bag of groceries. As I reached the porch, I noticed 2 figures sitting on the wooden steps. They were huddled together under a single, thin blanket, their shoulders shaking from the damp chill. They wore expensive designer coats that were entirely unsuited for the harsh, wet climate of Blackwood. Their hair was damp with condensation, clinging to their cheeks. Vivian and Quinn. I stopped at the bottom of the steps, my grocery bag cradled in my arm. I didn't drop it. I didn't gasp. I just stood there, looking at them through the swirling fog. Silas. Vivian was the first to speak. Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse and trembling. She stood up, the blanket slipping from her shoulders onto the wet wood. She had lost weight. The sharp, arrogant edge she usually carried was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, desperate look. Quinn stood up right behind her. She reached out, her fingers twitching as if she wanted to grab my sleeve, but she stopped herself, her hand trembling in the cold air. Silas, we found you. Oh my God, we finally found you. You shouldn't be here, I said. My voice was as flat and cold as the stones beneath my feet. Please, just hear us out, Quinn cried, tears instantly spilling over her lower lids, carving clean paths through the damp dust on her face. We drove all night. Our mom told us where you were. She didn't want to tell us, but we begged her. We knelt on the floor and begged her for 3 days, Silas. I told your mother to tell you not to come, I said, walking past them up the steps. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and immediately began to close it. Before the latch could click, Vivian threw her body against the wood. Silas, please, don't shut us out. If you shut the door now, I don't think I'll survive it. I looked through the crack of the door. Her face was pressed against the wood, her eyes wide and bloodshot, filled with a primal, terrified desperation. I let out a slow, tired breath. I knew that if I closed the door, they would just sit on my porch all night in the freezing fog, and the local sheriff, who knew me well by now, would eventually get involved. I didn't want a scene. I didn't want my quiet, peaceful life in Blackwood tainted by their high-stakes drama. 5 minutes, I said, stepping back and leaving the door open. And then you leave. They scrambled inside like stray dogs escaping a storm, shivering violently as the warmth of the cottage hit them. They stood in the center of my small living room, looking around at the simple, modest furniture, the stone fireplace, the lack of any photos of them or their family. It's so small, Quinn whispered, her voice trembling. Silas, why are you living like this? Your old house was so beautiful. We went there. The new owners wouldn't even let us pass the gate. They called the police on us. It's my home, I said, setting the groceries on the kitchen counter. I didn't offer them tea. I didn't offer them a seat. I just stood by the counter, arms crossed, watching them. You have 4 minutes left. Vivian took a step forward, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Silas, we are so sorry. We were stupid. We were blind. Jasper, he manipulated us. He made us feel like we were in some kind of competition, and we lost our minds. Don't blame Jasper for your choices, Vivian, I said quietly. Jasper didn't push me into the river. You did. Jasper didn't make a bet about my allergies. Quinn did. He might have been the audience, but you two were the actors. Quinn flinched, a sob tearing from her throat. She fell to her knees right there on my hardwood floor, her expensive coat pooling around her. I didn't know, Silas. I swear to God, I thought you were just exaggerating. You always survived everything. You always took care of us. I thought you were invincible. No one is invincible, Quinn. I nearly died. Twice, I said, my voice rising slightly, though my face remained expressionless. The first time, I walked out of the river shivering, and you called me a brat because I was ruining Jasper's mood. The second time, I was suffocating on my kitchen floor, unable to breathe, while you two walked out laughing about a bet you won. We didn't know. Vivian screamed, her voice cracking as she too fell to her knees beside her sister, grabbing the hem of my jeans. We didn't know you didn't have your EpiPen. We thought you'd just take a pill and be fine. When we came back the next day and saw the ambulance tracks in the yard, and the house was empty, Silas, our hearts stopped. We called every hospital in the city. We searched for you for days. You searched for me because you realized you had committed a crime, I said, gently but firmly pulling my jeans out of Vivian's grip. I stepped back, leaving them kneeling on the floor like penitent children. You didn't search for me because you love me. You searched for me because your perfect, comfortable little world was starting to show cracks, and you realized the person who kept it together was gone. That's not true, Quinn sobbed, rocking back and forth. We love you, Silas. We've loved you since we were toddlers. Remember? We used to fight over who would marry you. Our parents joked about it. Yes, I remember, I said. And then you grew up, and you told me those years were just childish nonsense. The very next day, you threw me in a freezing river for a stranger. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of their ragged breathing and the crackle of the fire. They looked up at me, their faces pale and streaked with dirt and tears. For the first time, they seemed to realize the depth of what they had lost. It wasn't just a friend or a foster brother or a convenient housekeeper. They had lost the only person who had ever loved them unconditionally, who had taken their flaws, their tantrums, and their cruelty and returned it with warmth, homemade burgers, and quiet patience. We can start over, Vivian whispered, her eyes pleading. We'll do whatever you want, Silas. We'll sell our house. We'll move here to this tiny town. We'll work in your shop. We'll cook for you. We'll take care of you, just like we promised at your mother's funeral. Please, just don't leave us alone. I looked at them. I looked at their tear-stained faces, their trembling hands, their desperate posture. A year ago, this scene would have been my ultimate fantasy. The sisters who abandoned me, kneeling at my feet, begging for my forgiveness. I would have felt a surge of triumph, a cruel sense of satisfaction. But sitting here now, in the quiet home I had built for myself, looking at the two girls I had once loved more than my own life, I felt nothing but a profound, exhausting sadness. I don't hate you, I said softly. Their eyes lit up with a sudden, desperate hope. Silas, but I don't love you either, I continued. The hope died instantly in their eyes, replaced by a cold, hollow dread. I don't want you to move here, I said, walking to the door and opening it wide. The fog had grown even thicker, a white wall that swallowed the world outside. I don't want your apologies, and I don't want your dinners. The Silas who loved you died in that freezing river, and the last of his ashes were swept away on my kitchen floor. Silas, please, Quinn whimpered, unable to stand. Vivian had to help her up, her own legs shaking violently. Goodbye, Vivian. Goodbye, Quinn, I said. They stood at the threshold of my home, looking back at me one last time. They wanted me to yell. They wanted me to scream, to call them monsters, to give them some kind of emotional reaction they could work with. But I only gave them silence. Slowly, they stepped out onto the wet porch. I closed the door, slid the deadbolt into place, and walked back into my warm kitchen. A year later, the coastal town of Blackwood was hit by a sudden, spectacular spring. The gray fog that usually blanketed the cliffs cleared, revealing a brilliant, deep blue sea and hills covered in wild yellow gorse. My restoration shop was doing incredibly well. I had taken on Leo as a full-time apprentice, and we had more orders than we could handle. The locals knew me as the quiet, reliable craftsman on the hill, a man of few words, but always kind, always steady. One afternoon, a package arrived at the shop. It was a heavy wooden crate with no return address, only my name written in a neat, familiar handwriting. Leo helped me pry open the lid. Inside, wrapped in layers of soft packing paper, was a beautifully bound, antique cookbook. It was a rare first-edition volume of traditional family recipes, dating back to the late 1800s. Tucked inside the cover was a small, simple card. Silas, we found this in an old shop in the city and thought of you. We know you don't want us in your life, and we respect that. We are finally in therapy, both of us. We're trying to learn how to be human beings who don't hurt the people they care about. We sold the family house. We donated Jasper's share of the money to a charity for victims of financial fraud, and the rest we used to start a small community kitchen in our neighborhood. We don't cook for bets anymore. We cook for people who actually need it. You don't have to reply. You don't have to forgive us. We just wanted you to know that the anchor you left behind finally forced us to learn how to swim. Be well, Silas. V and Q. I stared at the card for a long time. Is everything okay, Silas? Leo asked, looking over from his workbench where he was sanding down an old chair. Yes, I said, a soft, genuine smile spreading across my face. I closed the book, feeling the smooth, aged leather under my fingers. Everything is perfectly fine. I walked over to the shelf behind my desk and placed a book among my collection of restored treasures. It was scarred, it was old, and it had been through a lot of damage, but it was clean. I walked back to my workbench, picked up my tools, and got back to work. Outside, the sun was shining, and the river below the cliffs was running clear and free, carrying the last remnants of the winter ice out to the endless sea.